Okay, hi, welcome back. So today I want to address the question of whether a tribalism is natural. And this is, it seems to be a fairly topical subject. It's interesting from a sort of evolutionary biology / psychology point of view, but it seems to be also an issue of some political significance these days. Not just because there seems to be a great deal of tribalism around, but also because a lot of people are justifying, rationalizing their tribalism and condemning those who try to avoid tribalism with the claim that they're just running counter to human nature, that in fact tribalism is sort of the natural state of the human condition. So I want to address that today. And I made a prior video, sort of preface or something, not really, that it's kind of it will serve as a reference and to a small extent as a template for this one. This one's called Is War Natural? And you'll see there's a lot of similarities in the arguments here, though I'm going to go into more detail about tribalism here, since that was the original topic. So I started the Is War Natural video with the question, well, what do you mean by natural? And the same thing applies when we're talking about tribalism. So if by natural, if you say tribalism is natural, if by natural you mean that sort of the evolved human condition, including evolved human psychology, is such that it can give a rise to tribalism, well, yes, in that definition, then tribalism is natural. But of course, this isn't, not only is this not the only possible interpretation of the phrase, but that doesn't seem to me to be the standard definition that we're hearing these days. And that seems to be more along the lines that tribalism is an innate, inevitable manifestation of human nature. That is to say, to use a language that isn't used so much anymore in evolutionary theory, is that it's hardwired into us. Tribalism is hardwired into us. And to presume to live and think in some way other than tribal is just contrary to human nature. And that is not true. And there's just plenty of evidence to rule that out. And so I want to go through some of that. But initial potential confusion that maybe should be clarified off the top is that I think sometimes people are confusing the idea of tribalism with sociality, a propensity to engage socially with others. There's no doubt that humans are highly social. And arguably, if you follow the line of argument of someone like Richard Alexander, probably our high propensity for sociality gives rise, or was given rise to, or at least rose in lockstep with tribalism, right? You know, as you know, humans were so tribal that one had to develop skills at being effectively social to build one's own tribe, or one's own coalition, might be more accurate, but anyways, to be able to compete effectively with the others, right? But the irony is that the benefits that come, the reason we sociality not only emerged as part of our evolved psychology, but we've developed a huge suite of traits for being effective at maintaining sociality, is because there's so many huge benefits to being social. You know, safety in numbers, and economies of scale, and comparative advantage in trade, and all these kind of things, right? Now, the irony is that while tribalism may be partly responsible for our evolved disposition to be highly social animals, and we are the most social animal on the planet, nothing else even comes close. No hymenoptera do not even come close. I won't talk about that today, but we are unique in this way, right? But I say the irony is that while possibly tribalism gave rise to all these adaptations for sociality, the benefits of sociality are actually limited by the degree of tribalism that we have. Right? So ironically, the very thing that some people might take to be tribalism, i.e. our evolved disposition for high sociality, in fact may be limited in terms of the benefits it can provide to the degree that we are, that we behave in a tribal way. So there's a bit of an irony there. But as to this whole question that whether we're hardwired to be tribal, I mean, this would have to turn to some kind of group selection theory ultimately, I think, and I don't think there's just any grounds for group selection theory. There's a lot of confusion around this. There's no doubt that if you're evolved in such a way to participate in certain groups, and those groups get advantages, and as long as those advantages filter down to the individuals, then that will be selected for. But that's not really group selection, right? That's individual selection expressed through a venue of some kind of coalitional building activity, and clearly humans are highly disposed to build coalitions. But the fact of the day is, I mean, the simple rule of thumb when you're dealing with evolutionary theory is that it comes down to the individual genome, right? I mean, each one of us individually, unless you have a monozygotic twin, identical twin, you have a completely unique genome, and in that sense you have a completely unique genetic interest, right? But that, and of course some people confuse that into thinking, well, therefore we all should act selfishly, but that simply isn't true. Sometimes the best way to serve our own interest is to make coalitions and cooperate with others. That is sometimes the best way of, and this kind of behavior is what people often confuse as group selection. It's not group selection, right? It's just if your genetic disposition is such that allows you to engage in coalitions that advance your genetic interests, and of course we're always talking about inclusive interests because you're benefiting your immediate family who share your genes to a significant degree, right? But as long as the outcome is beneficial at the individual level, then that's going to be a sustainable, from an evolutionary perspective, that's going to be a sustainable strategy. But here's the interesting thing, right? Even in the social context, with all the benefits that come from being a highly social animal, we also cheat, right? We cheat on our society. We cheat on the social others, who are around us, right? And this is, beautifully illustrated in the work of Dan Ariely in his book, the title which I think is The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, where he does all these experiments under different conditions and has discovered that basically, giving, all us being equal, pretty much everyone will lie and cheat. But they only do so to a small degree. Now, the way Ariely describes it is that it's a degree to which they can still feel good about themselves as a person, but I don't think that's true. I think they do it to the degree to which they will not undermine the foundations of sociality. Because, in a sense, you can only cheat if there are people who are susceptible to being taken advantage of because they're engaged in a high trust activity like mutual sociality. Right? Plus, even cheaters don't want to always cheat, right? Sometimes they want to get the benefits of sociality, and sometimes they want to take advantage of sociality, right? So we seem to be wired to do both. Now, in Ariely's experiments, he showed that different contexts will affect the degree to which people are willing to cheat. Now, it turns out, interestingly enough, that the highest level of cheating that he found in his experiments were those in which people perceived members of an out-group to be getting away with cheating. This sort of raised the level of cheating to the highest level of all the sort of different kinds of conditions that he used. And this would be indicative of kind of tribalism, right? You feel like the other tribe is, getting away with something. Well, damn it, you're going to up the stakes too, sort of thing. But this is my point, right? This is the point. right, is that there isn't something hardwired here. It's a response to conditions, right? And this is something that, has to be understood. And for those of you who know this, I apologize for repeating it, but it needs to be reiterated, right? Any particular genotype of any particular individual can be expressed in a variety of different phenotypes. And any particular phenotype has available to it a range of different strategies. Right? And each one of these variables has a reaction norm, a constraint of what's possible. But there's surprising, for humans, and this is true for all kinds of animals, but for humans, a surprising amount of flexibility within those reaction norms, within the constraints of those reaction norms, right? And how this is all calibrated is through reading cues from the environment. Both the creation of the phenotype, it results from reading cues in the environment, and then the strategies pursued by any particular phenotype is a result of reading cues in the environment. And that's what's happening in those experiments described by Early, where different conditions, including the one I referred to, where you perceive outgroup members to be getting in the way of cheating, calibrates the strategy in relationship to the conditions. But this is my point, right, is that tribalism isn't sort of hardwired. It's a response to particular conditions. So I'm just going to give you two examples of work done in evolutionary biology / psychology, which illustrates this at work. One of these is what's called parasite stress theory, something that I believe I've talked about in other videos. And so the idea here is that we seem to have, in addition to our chemical immune system, we seem to have a behavioral immune system. There's something involved in us psychologically to take in cues from the environment that lead us to behave in certain ways that are going to be better or going to be better for our genetic interests, depending upon the conditions in the environment. And parasite stress is one of those conditions. So if we live in an environment where there's a high level of disease and infection, pathogens, parasites, and so forth, right, people tend to be suspicious of strangers, more inward looking. Whereas if they live in environments where there's less of that, they tend to be more open and more open to experience and open to strangers and new experience and this sort of thing. But part of the manifestation of this is that where there's a high level of parasite stress, people tend to be much more collective, which of course is tribalism is one form of collectivism, not the only one, but it's one form of collectivism. Whereas where people tend to live in areas where there's less parasite stress and therefore threat of infection, people tend to be more individualists, right? So the degree to which you're prone to be tribal or individualist is affected by your perception of the threat presented to your well-being, and either by your genetic interests, from levels of stress. And this has been charted out. They charted this all over the United States and all over the world, in fact. And it, of course, tends to align with climate, right? Hotter climates tend to have a higher parasite stress, colder climates less so, this kind of thing. So there's an example, right? Where the people are not fundamentally different that live in these different climates necessarily, but they certainly are responding differently to different conditions. Perhaps even more interesting is an experiment that, well, it was originally, the original version of the experiment was done by Solomon Asch, real pioneer in this conformity studies. In fact, Stanley Milgram, who's probably even more famous, it was a student of Solomon Asch. So Asch did this famous experiment. So the experiment would be if you were experiencing the experiment, you would experience something like this. Right? So you're in this room with a few other people. I can't remember. Maybe let's just say, for the sake of argument, half a dozen other people. And you come into you're brought into sort of a classroom, and there's sort of an instructor up at the front, and you're shown a set of geometric shapes. So let's say lines, right? So let's say on the one hand you have a line A, which is a certain length, and then you have lines B, C, and D, right? 3 more that are all different lengths, right? And so the instructor at the front will ask which one of the set of 3 is the same length as A over here, right? And you'd go around the room, right, and ask each person. Each person would, give the right answer and come to you last, let's say, and then you too would give the right answer, right? So this would be this would seem like a fairly straightforward exercise, right? But then, all of a sudden, about one particular set of relationships, the person at the front would ask this question, and the first person to give an answer would give the wrong answer. I mean, obviously, the wrong answer. And you'd be sitting there thinking, well, what a dope. What's wrong with him, right? The second person would get up and give the same wrong answer. And then the third person would get up and give the same wrong answer. And everyone gave the same wrong answer, and then it came to you. And what do you do? So it turns out that, in fact, the way that what's really going on is the people who you thought, the half dozen of you were all engaged in the experiment, but it's not true. You're the only one that is being experimented on. The others are just pretending to be experimental subjects, and they're part of the experiment and have deliberately given the wrong answer. And the thing is to see what you will do in this situation. And astoundingly, it turned out that most people, an amazing number of people, went along with the herd, right, and gave the wrong answer for fear of, standing out, or, insecurity of, am I misunderstanding something? But I don't want to stand out, right? I don't want everyone to be looking at me and saying, what's wrong with you? In the same way that I was looking, judging them and saying, what idiots you are, right? By the time 5 of them, are on the same side and I'm on the other side, most people aren't prepared to stand up and say, oh, they don't want to be the ones facing that the same judgment from others in a social situation. So that was an interesting experiment. But then that experiment was repeated in the 1990s, and now I'm not remembering was Doug Kendrick? Yeah, I'll try and find the source to this and put it in the source notes. But anyways, a series of researchers replicated the Solomon Asch experiment, but they did something different. They divided their subjects up into half. And before they went in, each one individually going in to do the experiment, before going into the experiment, they were shown a short film, and meant to prime them in very different ways. So on the one hand, one group would see a film that was meant to incur feelings of anxiety and fear, I can't remember what I can't remember what was in these videos, but I think it was like it's at night and someone trying to break into the house or something like this. I can't remember, something like this. And then on the other hand, the other group were shown videos that were beautiful, sexy people and flirty-ish, and all meant to trigger mating dispositions. And so now you had 2 different control groups taking these experiments. Right, the one who was being prepped for anxiety, fear. The other was being prepped for a mating disposition. So it turns out that if you repeat this Solomon Asch experiment, that the people whom were prepped for fear and anxiety very much replicate the original Asch outcomes going along with the group in high conformity. However, among those who were prepped for a mating disposition before going in, the males, not the females, but the males, and keep in mind, males are, when you talk about tribalism, you're often talking about conflict and war, and that's, usually the business of males, right? So the males who had been prepped for mating did not go along with the group. The males who were prepped for mating stood up and said, no, you're all wrong. You're idiots. Right? Presumably because when you're afraid, you stick close to the herd. right? Whereas when you're looking to mate, you want to stand out from the herd. You want the females to say, oh, hey, look at him. He's interesting, right? So again, the way our evolutionary psychology is evolved, is such that we take in cues from our environment to calibrate the kind of behavior that we engage in. And sometimes that behavior will be highly individualistic, depending upon the circumstances, and what cues were taken from the environment, and other times it will tend to be more tribal, more herd-like. So yes, tribalism can result from a human sociality, but it doesn't have to. And it's not even the prime mover. It's just a means of being able to preserve ourselves, to protect our genetic interests. So in the earlier video I did on war, I made the point that we're actually seeing a decline of war because it's becoming possible, or the situation has arisen in which, whereas previously war had been the most effective means to gain control over resources, and hence our species engaged in a whole lot of war. But since the Industrial Revolution, it's actually become more profitable not to go to war. If you're a wealthy country, now it's not true of poor countries. Poor countries are still going to war with each other because that still remains the best way for them to gain resources, to take them from other people. But once you have a highly mechanized, automated, highly organized production process, mode of production, if you like, and a highly integrated system of international trade, for the prosperous countries who are engaging in this, all that war promises is the disruption of these mechanisms that create huge amounts of wealth. So you cross a threshold. Prior to that threshold, war is more beneficial in terms of accumulating resources. Beyond that threshold, war becomes disruptive of international trade. It becomes destructive of production. It squanders and creates wasteful production, producing things that are just going to be blown up, and so on. And so beyond that threshold, war becomes actually less productive as a way of generating resources and generating prosperity and wealth. And that's why increasingly, since the Industrial Revolution, quite dramatically since the end of the Second World War, we see no wealthy countries going to war with each other anymore, and not even really fearing going to war with each other anymore. So the circumstances that made war appear to be a sort of innate, hardwired part of human nature, it turns out it's just conditional. War was just a means to an end. The end was, getting resources, right? War was just a means to it. But once war becomes no longer an effective means, it's not being pursued as much, not by those who would likely be harmed by it. Same thing of tribalism, right? Tribalism is a means to advance our genetic interests, right? It's not the genetic interest itself. The genetic interest is, and always has been, and really probably only ever can be, individual. So the question is then, that answers the question of whether it's inevitable, as some would claim. It's not inevitable. But then it also raises the question is, can we transcend tribalism? In the same way it appears that we're moving in the direction of transcending war, and if you want the fuller argument of that, watch the earlier video, is it possible for us to transcend tribalism? I think it is. But of course, the question is going to be what would be the conditions. We understand what conditions it is that allow us to present the possibility of transcending war. It's not so clear what the conditions of transcending tribalism would be. I mean, in a vague sense, probably it's something like security, right? I mean, going back to that Ash/Kendrick or whoever the researchers were who replicated the Ash experiment, going back to that experiment, right? Clearly, high levels of anxiety, fear, that encourages tribalism, right? So the degree to which you can remove those things is the degree to which you can reduce tribalism. And clearly, as the world becomes more prosperous, that certainly is one contributor to eliminating the conditions that are likely to give rise to tribalism. But that probably can't eliminate everything, because the United States is still a pretty prosperous country today. But there's a real problem with tribalism in the United States right now. I don't think anyone's surprised or shocked to hear me say that. So tribalism is not going to disappear, I think, as entirely as war, if in fact this is the way things go. But that doesn't mean that there can't be conditions that eliminate tribalism, and in fact make tribalism counterproductive in the same way as war is becoming counterproductive for wealthy nations. So again, tribalism, like war, it's a means to an end. It's not the end itself. The end is your genetic self-interest, and of course I always mean your inclusive genetic self-interest, including your family. So no, tribalism is not inevitable, and it might well be that in the same way as we're on the path to the potential end of war, we might be on a path to the end of tribalism, but it's going to be a bumpy road along the way. So that's that. Those are my thoughts. Love to hear your comments. And I don't say this very often, but please, if you're finding these little talks of any interest, value, by all means, like and share, and especially subscribe. Thank you. Talk to you later down the road. Bye. Ciao.